The Witch-King of Angmar was the lord of the Nazgul, king of Angmar and Sauron's chief warlord in his wars. Of Wraith, the Witch-King of Angmar was nearly indestructible, a terrifying warrior and a cunning strategist. He was born during the Second Age of the World in the port city of Anduni in the province of Andustar on the star-shaped island of Numenor. As the second son of King Tar-Kiriatan, meaning shipbuilder, and the younger brother of Tar-Atanamir the Great, he traced his lineage to the first king of Numenor, Elros, called Tar-Miniatur, the brother of Elrond Half-Elven. His mother gave him the name Tindamul, meaning twilight son, in Quenya, for he was born during a solar eclipse, and his hair was blacker than any she had ever seen. Those lords of Tar-Kiriatan's court who favored the use of Adunaig, which signified their displeasure with the Eldar and the ban of the Valar, called him Murazor, meaning Prince of Black Fire. He was the most gifted and powerful of the many great lords of Numenor. Although only a prince, his might outshone all but a few of Numenoran's kings, and in the end he lived, in a way, much longer than any of the second-born. Murazor's lifetale covers over 6.5 millennia, and is one of man's greatest tragedies. Like his brother, the proud and greedy heir to the throne, the Black Prince supported his father's ambitions and lobbied for the increased exploitation of Middle-earth. Tar-Kiriatan sought great wealth and sent his huge fleets to Middle-earth in order to extract tribute. Both his sons embraced the benefits of this often ruthless policies. Both embodied their father's penchant for material things and power, which was hardly surprising in the light of the fact that they witnessed their father force their grandfather from the Numenoran throne. Atanamir, however, enjoyed the privileges and attention accorded to the heir to the Eden throne, and Tar-Kiriatan showed him his prideful love in a way never exhibited to Murazor. The jealousy inherent in the family character eventually grew to frightening proportions in the Black Prince's heart, fermenting hatred and unbounded desire. Always aggressive and fiery, Murazor's resolve to leave home and establish his own empire in the vulnerable expanses of Middle-earth. He assembled a small fleet and set sail for Middle-earth when he was 60 years old. The prince landed in Vinyalonde, also called Londdair, at the mouth of the Gwatlo River in Enedwaith. There he debarked at the ancient haven amidst little celebration. Within weeks he engaged in a brief struggle for dominance over the strategic port. His plans to carve out a kingdom in the fertile lands that Sauron's hordes ravaged in the war with the elves failed though, forcing Murazor and his followers to voyage southward. 2 years later, the Black Prince's ships dropped anchor in Umbar, where the Numenoran lord proclaimed himself king. Although successful in wresting control from the local colonists, he ruled only for a few months. The Numenoran adventurer's pretensions of rule faced an inevitable and overwhelming challenge from his father, Tar-Kiriatan, who ordered his rebel son to return home to Numenor. Murazor refused to follow the king's bidding, but he dared not remain in Umbar in defiance of the edict from Armenellos. Sauron well perceived the prince's displeasure and offered him a means to achieve his goals. The Dark Lord realized that both Murazor and his older brother Atanamir sought to hold on to their youth, and that they feared aging more than any corporeal foe. Atanamir showed his terror of death when he later refused to surrender the scepter of Numenor until he died. The Black Prince, on the other hand, exhibited this fear by speaking openly of his bitterness toward the immortal elves, to whom he was related through his ancestor Elros Half-Elven. Ever vigilant and perceptive, the Dark Lord sought to corrupt Murazor, seducing him by the promises of immortality and power, even inviting this dissatisfied Numenoran to Mordor. The Black Prince went to Barad-dûr rather than return to his father, and became a pupil of Sauron. During the next 115 years, he expanded his knowledge of enchantments and spellcasting, becoming an exceedingly powerful sorcerer. Murazor's knowledge of the black arts was second only to Sauron's, and he quickly rose to become the Dark Lord's most trusted lieutenant. His lessons learned, the Black Prince submitted his spirit to his master, who gave him a ring of power, one of those acquired in the sack of Eregion. With the power of his ring, Murazor increased his own abilities, but eventually started hating life, as he was slowly drawn more and more under Sauron's dominion. In the end, he became the dreadful ring wraith. He also forsook his name, and from now on he was known only as the first of the 9 Nazgul, the Witch-King, or the Lord of Morgul. Throughout the rest of the Second Age, the Black Prince stayed in Mordor and served Sauron by coordinating the efforts of the other Ulairi, meaning the Ringwraiths. These years comprised the period of his complete transformation into a hideous wraith possessed of an exceptional command of sorcery. His role as the Lord of the Nazgul testified to his awesome magical skills. Ironically, Murazor was the only ringwraith who had not presided over a kingdom of his own for a considerable period prior to accepting his Ring of Power. However, his origins as a prince of the Edain of Numenor provided him with inherent abilities that far exceeded those of his undead peers. Sauron gave the Black Prince all of the trappings of a king, for, aside from Sauron himself, the Lord of Morgul was the mightiest servant of darkness in Mordor's hierarchy. No one, not even the warlord Gottmog, the later lieutenant of Morgul, or the mouth of Sauron, enjoyed such trust of the Dark Lord. Their relationship flourished throughout the latter part of the Second Age, becoming similar to the one between Morgoth and Sauron himself in the First Age of Arda. The teacher and pupil sought to build an unassailable kingdom and establish dominion over men. Unfortunately for them, the corruption of Numenor that they fostered for so long produced, as a side effect, a policy of imperialism. The goals of Numenor's kings became to mirror, at least in part, those of Dark Lord himself. Both powers sought to unite the world under one absolute monarch. Inevitably, this rivalry between Sauron and the Black Prince's brethren erupted into an outright war. Ar-Pharazôn, the last Numenoran king and the strongest of Numenor's later kings, led an armada to Middle-earth in order to crush the forces of Mordor, intending to show all the peoples who the mightiest power is, and also to establish absolute hegemony over Middle-earth. Landing at Umbar, he marched northward across near Harad, contested at that time by Numenor and Mordor's client Adunafel the Nazgul, and met the host of Mordor near the river Harnen. The Edan king's army appeared too potent for Sauron to contest, so he decided rather to surrender without fight, intending to undermine the power of Numenor from within, when the direct battle offered no chance of success. Ar-Pharazôn took great pride in having one of the Maiar as captive, and brought Sauron with him back to Numenor as a prized trophy. The capture of the Dark Lord left the Black Prince briefly in control of the Kingdom of the Shadow, but the omnipresence of the Edain forced the Ringwraith and Sauron's other minions into hiding. This prevented the Lord of the Nazgul from waging any significant campaign in his master's absence. Although he and the other Ringwraiths contested Númenor advances in certain regions of Middle-earth, the Black Prince operated very quietly, until Sauron's return after the downfall of Numenor. Sauron's reappearance in Mordor sparked a renewal of wars of conquest against the free peoples of Middle-earth, and brought the Ringwraiths out of hiding. For the next 109 years, the forces of the Shadow regrouped, grew, and mobilized under the guidance of the Lord of the Nazgul. Then the Black Prince led an army into Ithilien and assailed Gondor, the newly founded South Kingdom, which, like Arnor in the north, was one of the kingdoms in exile. King Anarion of Gondor, the co-ruler with his brother Isildur, successfully defended the west bank of the Anduin, dealing a stalwart blow to the Black Prince's plan to subjugate the South Kingdom before the arrival of any Dunedain relief force from Arnor. The ensuing standoff lasted 5 years, until, finally, the Black Prince was forced to retire towards Morannon in the face of an army from the north, led by Gil-galad and Elendil the Tall. Joined by the Dark Lord's main horde, the Black Prince turned on his pursuers at the fields of Dagorlad, in front of the gates of Mordor. There, the last alliance of men and elves vanquished the lord of the Nazgul's warriors and broke the defenses of the Black Land. The victors chased the shattered remnants of Sauron's army to Barad-dûr, and then laid siege to the Black Tower itself for 7 years. Anarion died during this siege under a stone cast from the battlements, but his death was avenged a year later. Although Sauron slew both Gil-galad and Elendil, King Isildur of Gondor succeeded in cutting the One Ring from Dark Lord's twisted hand. Thus Sauron and his 9 Nazgul servants passed into the shadows. The last alliance finally entered the hold of the Lord of the Rings, ending both the war and the Second Age. The Numenoran kingdoms in exile enjoyed great prosperity during the first millennium of the Third Age, for it was not until its 1000th year that Sauron stirred again in Arda. Gondor conquered a vast realm, while Arnor established dominion over most of Eriador. Despite constant wars with Harad and the sundering of the North Kingdom, the Dunedain reached great heights of power. As Gondor reached the apogee of its might, Sauron secretly returned. The Nazgul, however, returned from the shadows too, and began restoring their strength in Middle-earth. The Lord of the Nazgul went to the fortress of Dol Guldur in Rhovanion, where Sauron hid under the disguise of the Necromancer. He remained in the Dark Lord's hold for the next 2.5 centuries. From this secure refuge, he plotted the destruction of Arnor, the currently weaker one of the 2 Dunedain kingdoms. The Lord of the Nazgul understood that subterfuge was now important, knowing that the loss of the One Ring at the end of the Second Age significantly weakened his master, and thus also the forces of darkness as a whole. When the methodical plan to crush Arnor was complete, the Lord of the Nazgul flew north to the plateau that rises between the 2 northwestern spurs of the Misty Mountains. This cool, high plain overlooked the wilds along the northeastern frontier of the Dunedain realm he planned to destroy. It was there where he founded his own kingdom, Angmar, meaning Iron Home in Quenya, called also the land of the Witch-King. He summoned men, orcs, and other creatures of evil inclination to his banner. No one knew yet that he was actually a servant of the long-dormant Sauron, and few that he was a wraith. The Lord of the Nazgul ruled his new domain from the mountain citadel of Carn-dûm, meaning Red Fort, or Red Hold in Sindarin, a giant cavern fortress built into and around the last peak in the northern Hitaglir. Never revealing his true identity, he gathered 2 hosts, an army of over 30 orc tribes commanded by the Olok warlord Rogrok, and the Angmarim, a force of over 10,000 men drawn not only from the Dark Lord subject peoples in Eriador, but also from the tribes resettled there from Rhovanion and Rhûn. These warriors deployed in holds along the ridges north of the Etten Moors and the cool plain of Oyolat. Holds like Morkai and Mount Grem threatened all of the North Kingdom's northern frontier, but the main force initially concentrated nearly the sparsely populated northeastern border, above the relatively vulnerable and rude realm of Rhudaur, which is Sindarin word for Trollshaw. The Dunedain in the Northern Kingdom were plagued by disunity, leading to Arnor's breakup, which resulted in the split into three ostensibly allied successor states: Arthedain in the northwest, Cardolan in the south, and Rudaur in the northeast, that were, nevertheless, constantly at war with each other. Both Arthedain and Rudaur lay near Angmar, but the latter of the two northern realms was far weaker. Arthedain enjoyed a very large proportion of Dunedain residents, harbored both of Arnor's former capitals, and most of the former kingdom's major fortresses. Rudaur, on the other hand, contained relatively few of the Dunedain, while most of its often disgruntled population was scattered in the rugged countryside. The Witch-King saw this vulnerability and played upon their opposition, sending in infiltrators and taking over the hearts of the men of that land. Rudaur presented itself as a natural target, and soon it was controlled by men secretly in Angmar's service. In the time of great hostility among the Dunedain kingdoms, the Witch-King's hungry army struck. In the first 5 decades of Angmar's rise, the Witch-King's hordes overwhelmed the East Wood and brought its surviving population under the shadow, with most of the Dunedain there being hunted down and slaughtered. Rudaur ceased to exist as an independent and free nation soon after, and later acted only as a both client state and buffer zone for Angmar. The conquest of Cardolan, the name meaning Land of the Red Hills, in Sindarin, was the Witch-King's next goal. While much stronger than Rudaur, it lacked Arthedain's military resources and natural defenses. Its capital and main city, Tarbat, sat on the lowlands along the river Gwatlo, while much of its border with Rudaur was composed of sparsely defended hedge wall. Cardolan's strategic value also invited attack, for Tarbat straddled the road between Arnor and Gondor, and the capture of this vital artery meant isolation for Arthedain. Just as important was that the Witch-King could virtually surround Arthedain's heartland by conquering its southern neighbor. These factors led to the subsequent attack on Cardolan. Rudaur declared war on the land of the Red Hills first. The fighting raged along the Mitatel and near Amon Sul, later called Weathertop, for the next 59 years. However, with the help of the Arthedan army, the Dunedain princes of Cardolan bested their old allies. Thus, the Witch-King was eventually forced to commit his own troops. After building his supply routes through Rudaur, the Witch-King ordered his forces to join the war and directly assault the dike and hedge wall that guarded Cardolan's northeastern bounds. The Angmarim crossed the open lone lands and smashed through the Dunedain defences south of Weathertop, surrounding the great Arnorian citadel of Amon Sul that housed one of the three Palantiri of the north. The host of Angmar cut the defending forces in half and drove the prince and his retainers through the Barrow Downs into the eaves of the Old Forest. There the last ruler of Cardolan died, and Tarbat fell. Arthedain's main army barely survived the battle that took place at Weathertop, with King Arvelec I being slain. Withdrawing into the surrounding hills with a seeing stone from the tower, the men of Arthedain yielded Amon Sul and retreated home to Fornost. The Angmarim wiped out its few remaining defenders, brave fighters who fought to cover the retreat of their brethren, razing the citadel afterwards. Once again the Witch-King prevailed. Cardolan passed into his fold. The Witch-King did not stop here, and continued to press the men of Arthedain, however, laying siege to Fornost. He even might have taken over all of Arnor in that one offensive. But Arafor, the 18-year-old son of Arvelec, came to leadership, and, with the help of the ancient elf Kiadan of Lindon, repelled the Witch-King's forces at Fornost and the North Downs. Elrond also brought an army of elves, from Rivendell as well as Lothlorien to their help, and the Witch King was pushed back and subdued. Arthedain survived for another 566 years after the collapse of its last sister state. Facing overwhelming odds, the Dunedain of the last successor kingdom doggedly drove off a number of major attacks along its eastern and northern boundaries during that period. Many of Arthedain's beleaguered people relocated south or east or concentrated in Fornost and in manors and settlements near the kingdom's interior, while its borders were fortified, enabling the Edain of the north to react to any significant incursions. And interesting note here, this shift in population invited the Hobbit migration into Arthedain's Shire as a side effect. The deeds of the Witch King sometimes worked to his undoing as well, for his sorcerer's invocation of the Great Plague swept away or drove off Cardolan's remaining residents, while hitting hard those of Arthedain, but it also decimated the Witch King's southern army. Angmarim in Rudaur and Angmar also fared poorly, much more so than the Dunedain, forcing the Witch King to sit still in Carn Dûm, rebuilding his shattered forces and delaying the final confrontation for another 3 centuries. Meanwhile, he at least sent Barrow-wights to inhabit the barrows in Tean Gothat. After nearly a decade of massing on the Arnorian frontier, he felt prepared enough to crush the last of the Arnorian kingdoms. The Witch King poised his armies for the killing blow. His attack was sudden, but not unexpected. King Arvedui realized that the host of Angmar could not be stopped without aid from Gondor. He had appealed to King Eanel II of Gondor a year before and sent the majority of his people south. But before any Gondorian forces arrived, and as the last unarmed women and children fled, the Witch King initiated his killing strike. Angmar's armies pushed into Arthedain. Fornost fell, and the Witch King took up residence in the palace there. Arvedui held out as best as he could on the North Downs, but was at last forced into hiding in the abandoned dwarf mines of the Nun in Naugrim in the Blue Mountains of Lindon. He finally perished in the ice bay of Forochel, in the shipwreck the following year, after spending some time with the lost people of the far north. Both of the Palantiri his retainers had rescued from the fall of Arthedain perished with him in the icy seas of Foroth. Their loss fittingly symbolized the end of the North Kingdom and the completion of the Witch King's primary goal. Although the Lord of the Nazgul crushed Arnor, he faced a much greater foe. A coalition was formed in the south. Arnor's relief force from everything Gondor could have spared landed in Lindon as Arvedui fled northward. There, the Gondorians joined the folk of Cíadan, and together with elf armies from Imladris, the surviving Dunedain of Arnor, and even a company of hobbit archers from the Shire, marched to challenge the victorious army of Angmar. The Witch King had grown overconfident, and, instead of staying behind his fortifications, initiated the attack. The Battle of Fornost was fought on the plain between Nenuyal and the North Downs. The Witch King probably may not have anticipated the strength brought against him. Therefore, the alliance gained the upper hand in the following battle. As Angmarian army began to fall back toward Fornost, Eanor's magnificent horsemen struck from the north, and the Witch King was routed. He decided to flee to Angmar and the safety of Carn Dûm, but the cavalry, with Arnor himself in the lead, overtook him. Moreover, an army of Rivendell arrived, led by Glorfindel, the mighty hero of old returned from the west, and charged his remaining forces. Angmar was purged of men and orcs, and all seemed lost for the Witch King in the face of such opponents. But the Witch King did not surrender easily. He himself came at the last, robed and masked in black, and riding a black horse. and attempted to kill Arnor with his own hands. Arnor's horse shied away from the assault and fled. The Witch King laughed as Arnor was brought away on his panicking horse. But Glorfindel came on his white charger, and faced with such power, the Witch King fled. He vanished into the shadows, and no one marked where he had gone. Arnor wanted to pursue him, seeking to kill the King of Angmar in combat and avenge his humiliation. But Glorfindel held him back, making his famous prophecy. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. Reluctantly, Eanor called off the chase, never forgiving himself the failure in the duel. The Witch King, on the other hand, used every opportunity to taunt the Gondorian champion that fear was the real reason which stopped Arnor in his pursuit. Nevertheless, Angmar's Iron Home fell later the same year, ending the saga of the Northern Wars. Following the fall of Angmar, Sauron sent his exiled lieutenant to join his 8 companions in Mordor. There, the Witch King gathered the Ringwraiths and planned a surprise attack against Minas Ithil, the Gondorian capital of Ithilien, and the key to the valuable passage of Cirith Ungol, or Spider Pass in common tongue. The Ringwraiths assembled a host in Gorgoroth and unleashed its fury 25 years after the fall of the kingdom of Angmar. Emerging from over the mountains, they began to surround the tower as its folk evacuated. The defenders were able to keep the way out open until the last civilians left. Only then did they retreat behind the walls, leaving the town to be cut off from the rest of Gondor. A 2-year siege followed. In the end, the defenders were overwhelmed. The Witch King entered Minas Ithil and made the White City his new home. It remained his abode until his death. The men of Gondor mourned the loss, renaming the fallen city Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery. From that point onward, the glow of the town's moonlit walls signified evil and shone like a symbol of the Witch King's terror. The Palantir housed in Minas Morgul's Tower of the Stone was transferred to Barad-dûr, where it served Sauron well throughout the next millennium. Its presence, coupled with the strategic and emotional value of the city itself, compelled the Dúnedain of Gondor to try to recover the fortress town 2 years after its fall. Ever deadly and always wily, the Morgul lord played upon their desires and desperation, twice challenging Gondor's champions to single combat. In this way, the Witch King slew Prince Eadur of Dol Amroth, the last of the first line of princes in Dor and Eärnil. Meanwhile, Eanor succeeded his father as king of Gondor, and still held the Witch King in special hostility due to his humiliation at the Battle of Fornost. Right after his coronation, the Witch King sent him a taunting challenge, but Mardel the Steward restrained Arnor from rash actions. 46 years later, the challenge was repeated, and it finally succeeded in provoking Eanor, who rode with a small escort to Minas Morgul. None of the party ever returned. Trusting his own might and the word of the Nazgul, Eanor came alone to the Tower of Sorcery. This foolishness cost him his freedom, as he was ambushed, captured alive, and then tortured for a long time, until he finally died deep in the prisons of Minas Morgul. Thus ended Gondor's line of kings, because Eanor had no sons. Eanor's capture marked the beginning of the era of ruling stewards in Gondor, and signified the end of any immediate hope of recapturing Minas Morgul, as well as the western pass into Mordor. The Witch King oversaw Mordor for the next 891 years, biding his time, until the forced return of Sauron from Dol Guldur. He and the Nazgul built up their armies, including the terrible new orc race of Uruks. His minions multiplied, fortifying the Morgul Vale around the mouth of Cirith Ungol. Minas Morgul became a nearly impenetrable bastion, haunted by the shrieks of the resident ring wraiths. All the time, the Dark Lord's Black Captain prepared for the coming war and guarded his master's land. The Witch King launched only one attack into the neighboring province of Ithilien during this respite, which climaxed in an orc attack against the exposed and underpopulated city of Osgiliath, meaning the Fortress of Stars in Sindarin, lying on both sides of the Anduin River. This former capital of Gondor sat astride the best route across the lower part of the great river, and its huge stone bridge loomed as the most convenient route to Minas Tirith. The army of Mordor swept out of Minas Morgul and drove through the old city under the cover of a befouled night sky. They were driven out by Boromir, steward of Gondor, who also led campaigns to recapture Ithilien. Although retaken by the Dunedain, Osgiliath's bridge was destroyed. The lofty tower of the stone that held the master palantir and rose originally above the middle of the river fell into the Anduin. Thus was the palantir of Osgiliath lost. The fortress of stars became devastated, deserted, and ever-threatened stronghold, while the rest of the populated Ithilien came under the shadow. Boromir was a great captain, and even the Witch King feared him, but he was felled by a Morgul wound, and his rule was but 12 years. The future companion of Frodo, also called Boromir, was named after this heroic steward. Meanwhile, the work of reconstruction began on Barad-dûr, 10 years after the Dark Lord's arrival in Mordor. The minions of darkness gathered in Gorgoroth and Minas Morgul for the next and ultimate assault on Gondor. Sauron finally declared himself openly, sending 3 of his ringwraiths to Dol Guldur, though the Witch King was left in Minas Morgul. Sauron was desperate in light of the possibility that the lost ruling ring would fall into the hands of a worthy foe. He resolved to destroy the 3 peoples before they could gather under the banner of another king. These preparations lasted 67 years, before the host of Mordor stood poised for the Great War. With the end of winter, the Witch King led Sauron's southern army against the garrison at Osgiliath, throwing the Gondorians across the river. The Black Captain's forces pursued the defenders onto the western bank and through the west quarters, securing the city for the Dark Lord's coming invasion. Gondor's army, under the leadership of Boromir and his brother Faramir, reacted with greater strength than anticipated, however, and the southern horn was thrown back across the river, progressing no further. At that time, by lucky chance, the creature Gollum was captured and interrogated. Under torture, the wretched creature revealed the tale of the One Ring, and how it came to be in his possession. But from his words, Sauron misunderstood that the land of the hobbits who stole the ring was on the banks of the Gladden River, whence Gollum originally came from. As the front on Anduin stabilized, ending the first test of the 3 peoples, the Witch King, invisible and uncloaked, departed on the quest for the One Ring. Comil, the Witch King's second in command, reported that he was unable to find the Shire in the Vales of Anduin. The Witch King was determined to search north and west until the Shire was found. As chieftain of the Black Riders, he rode with the other 8 Nazgul up the Anduin Valley. They routed the few residents and uncovered nothing of any importance. Sauron's lieutenant realized that he had mistaken the ancient settlement of Susa for the real land called Shire. His plans for future search were halted when Sauron received word of the events in Gondor and the doings of the turncoat Saruman, concluding that the Wise did not yet have possession of the ring. He immediately sent the ringwraiths to Isengard. They skirted between Lorien and the cliffs of Moria and rode through Rohan. Wherever they passed, the terror they spread was so great that many fled the land, believing the riders heralded an invasion of the Dark Lord's forces. Nevertheless, they arrived at Isengard too late to prevent the escape of the captured wizard Gandalf. Saruman realized he had been revealed as a traitor to both sides due to his transparent lust for the ring, and, having no chance of deceiving Sauron any further, fortified himself in the Tower of Orthanc. The Witch-King did not have enough power with him to assault Saruman in his great fortress, though. He demanded the wizard come forth, but received only the voice of Saruman. None the less cunning and wary, Saruman convinced the Witch-King that Gandalf alone knew where the Shire and the ring were, and so the nine went out in search of him. Soon after, the ringwraiths came upon the traitor called Wormtongue, and questioned him. The terrified man told them everything he knew, that Gandalf had passed through Rohan, where the Shire was, and even that Saruman had lied to them. The Witch-King spared Wormtongue's life, foreseeing that Wormtongue would bring ruin to Saruman in the end. Taking the green way to Tarbad, the nine crossed the Guatlo and entered Old Cardolan. There Angmar divided his raids into 4 pairs, and went with the swiftest to Minhiriat. Along the way they captured several spies of Saruman, and found, to their delight, charts and maps of the Shire. They sent these spies to Bree-land, warning them that they now belonged to Mordor, not Saruman. Then they came to Sarn Ford, but the Dunedain rangers prevented them from crossing. The rangers sent for their captain, Aragorn II, as he was away, but defeating the whole 9 was a task beyond the power of the Dunedain, and may have been so even had Aragorn been present. The ringwraiths attacked at night, capturing the fort and killing many of the rangers. A few survivors fled northward to warn Aragorn of the ringwraiths' approach, but were pursued and slain or driven off into the wilds. The Witch-King sent 3 ringwraiths under Camil into the Shire itself, while he took the others north toward Andrat and Bree in hope of cutting off any support or opportunity for flight. But they had come too late again. The ring had moved on in the hands of a hobbit, Frodo Baggins. After failing to capture their prey, the Nazgul gave chase along the great eastern road. Uvatta, the messenger, broke off to deliver word to Camil of the hobbits' escape route, and brought back word from the spy they had spared, and who was now in Bree. The man had witnessed a vanishing act of Frodo, and had organized a night attack on the inn the hobbits were staying in. The Witch-King guessed that Frodo would head east, and sent 4 ringwraiths to Weathertop, the ruins of the tower he had destroyed so long ago. He himself went south along the Greenway, and discovered nothing. Gandalf followed him, but the Witch-King let him slip ahead, and attacked him on Weathertop. Standing firm at night, Gandalf was able to escape at dawn. Again the Witch-King divided his force, and sent 4 Black Riders after the wizard. Meanwhile, the chieftain of the Dunedain, Aragorn II, had become the guide of the hobbits, leading them through the wilderness to the old ruins on the Weathertop. The Witch-King and his 4 other companions rode also toward the commanding summit of Weathertop, where the view of the road and the neighboring expanse of Dir Erib offered means of ensuring that they could intercept the fleeing halflings. Seeing firelight on the peak, the 5 ringwraiths followed the most recent tracks up the hill and attacked the resting hobbits, in hope of attaining their master's prize. 3 Nazgul moved forward as the hobbits formed a tight circle around the fire. The Witch-King himself advanced on Frodo, and as the frightened hobbit put on the ring, he could see the wraiths as they truly were. The Witch-King was taller than the others, with long hair and a crown set on his helmet. Although terrified, Frodo resisted the wraith's approach, invoking the name of Elbereth. The Witch-King then used his dagger to stab Frodo. The tip of his blade broke off and remained in Frodo's shoulder. The Witch-King might have been afraid of Frodo a little bit, because he invoked Elbereth, a name of terror for the Nazgul. Then Aragorn counterattacked with flaming brands. Luckily, the firebrands, and Aragorn's bravery, with the help of Elbereth's invocation, enabled the hobbits to survive the nocturnal visit. As the five ringwraiths departed, believing their objective practically completed. Frodo's wound proved incurable even for Aragorn, for the Black Captain's blade embedded itself and slowly worked its way toward the hobbit's heart. Although primarily unsuccessful in the melee on Amon Sul, the Witch King's cursed weapon placed Frodo in grave danger of becoming a wraith and falling under the Ringwraith's spell. Strider realized the halfling's plight after finding the knife hilt and prepared an Atlas wash, although he knew that the party had little time to spare. With the first light of the day, the company fled toward the fort of Bruinen. They were joined by Glorfindel, an elf prince from Rivendell, sent by Elrond. The Witch King did not sit idle either. He resumed the hunt soon. After joining with Cumul's riders, who had been driven from the last bridge by his old enemy Glorfindel, he and the other Nazgul broke into furious pursuit. The nine rode their prey down at the Bruinen fort just west of Rivendell, where Frodo, now alone on Glorfindel's horse Asphalot, stopped. Calling for Frodo to surrender, he expected the hobbit, now visibly under the spell of the Morgul blade, to obey. As the hobbit balked and summoned his last strength to refuse the call and finish the crossing, the Witch King, seeing his defiance, laughed, and with a movement of his hand broke the hobbit's sword in two. Then the Witch King plunged into the river with two of his servants, Uwata and Dwor, only to find themselves engulfed beneath a torrential tide of magically summoned floodwaters. The enchanted current swept the Morgul lord and the other 8 of the Black Riders downstream. The other 5 were driven into the flood by Glorfindel and Aragorn, claiming their awful steeds. The Witch King took the only surviving horse back to Mordor, arriving there in December. He then sent aid to the other 8 Nazgul, and they returned home in secret. Thus ended the search for the ring. After the disaster at the Bruinen fort, the Witch King retired to Minas Morgul and returned to his role as a commander of Mordor's southern host. His goal was Minas Tirith and the defeat of Gondor. For this purpose he arrayed his main army outside Osgiliath, himself riding at the head of his demonic force of orcs, Haradrim, and Easterlings, dressed in black upon a black horse, as he had in the time of the wars of Angmar. While the other force issued out of Morannon and massed upriver by Caer Andros, providing the Ringwraith with a pair of Anduin crossings and ensuring that his enemies will not be able to escape north to Rohan. The men of Gondor still held the western part of Osgiliath, but when the Black Captain sent his army across the river, their forces were scattered and forced out of the ruined city. As the Morgul host drove across the river from the east, its vanguard smashing through the gates of Ramas Echo that enclosed the Pelennor Fields, another army came south from Caer Andros and entered the encircling outer walls from the north. The retreating defenders reached the city gates as the two armies joined, but their captain Faramir returned deadly wounded. Minas Tirith was surrounded and attacked soon after. Catapults began bombarding the city with fire, and severed heads of the defenders killed in Osgiliath and during the retreat. Then the large battering ram Grond, named after the hammer Morgoth himself had wielded in the First Age, was sent against the Great Gate. The Witch King has accompanied it in person, in order to be the first one to enter the besieged city. 3 times Grond struck the gate, empowered by the sorcery of the Witch King. The 3rd time the gate shattered in a flash of fire. The Witch King passed into Minas Tirith, but was confronted by Gandalf on Shadowfax. Gandalf forbade him entry, but the Witch King laughed and put on a show of power. The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. The red fires shone between it and the mantled shoulders vast and dark. From a mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter. "Old fool," he said, "old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it? Die now and curse in vain." And with that he lifted high his sword, and flames ran down the blade. As Gandalf stood resolute before the Witch-King, the Rohirrim finally arrived. 6,000 riders, including 120 Rohirrim of Theoden's personal guard, struck the attacking force from the north, sending waves of orcs into retreat. This turn of events made the Witch-King depart the Broken Gate and mount a fell beast waiting for him behind the lines. The center of gravity of the battle moved from the gate to the fields in front of the city walls. The Eotheroth, led by Eomer, overran the main road and rode into the Southrons between the ramparts and the river, while Theoden and his guard skirmished with the Haradrim lord and his riders in front of the great gates. For the first time the tide of battle favored the Free Peoples, and Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth gathered his warriors in the forecourt of the city in preparation of a sortie to support the riders of Rohan. The Lord of the Nazgul responded by personally intervening in the fray involving the King of Rohan, who led the charge of his warriors. Flying on the back of his fell beast, he dove upon Theoden. The advancing horses panicked, the king's guard was scattered. Snowmane, the king's horse, collapsed with a dart in the side, and Theoden was crushed beneath him. This assault reversed the Ringwraith's fortunes and endangered the Rohirric army, but it also enraged Theoden's niece Eowyn, who fought disguised as a young rider called Dernhelm. Fully armored and unrecognizable as a woman, Eowyn challenged the Witch King as he stood over the bodies of her uncle and his beloved mount Snowmane. But the Morgul lord scoffed at her words. The Witch King threatened Dernhelm with a terrible death, stating that he can't be killed by any mortal man. To this the rider revealed that she was a woman, Eowyn, announcing, "But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Eowyn I am, Eomund's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Be gone, if you are not deathless. For living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him." The Witch King well remembered the words of Glorfindel. He hesitated, but then moved forward. Without a word, the Morgul lord rose on the sweeping wings of his fell creature, his doubts and ire aroused. Eowyn stood strong though, as the evil beast descended to attack her with its hideous claws and beak. She parried the initial foray, and then sliced the monster's head from its long neck. The fell beast tumbled to the ground. But the Lord of the Nazgul rose again, and advanced with his mace held high. He struck her green shield, shattering it, breaking her shield arm. Then he raised his weapon for the terminal blow. Suddenly the hobbit Merry crept behind him, and plunged his Númenor blade into the back of the Witch King's knee, breaking the spell that held the Morgul lord's immortal form together, while giving Eowyn time to recover. The Rohirric maiden gathered herself and drove the blade through the Ringwraith's neck. Her sword broke as his crown toppled. The Witch King gave a great and horrible wail, perishing at last. As fated, no man slew Sauron's lieutenant. Instead, he perished at Pelennor Fields by the hand of a woman and an ancient dagger wielded by a halfling. The Lord of the Nazgul, after nearly 6,500 years, finally passed out of air. With his defeat and the coming of Aragorn II in the Black Ships, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields was lost for the Dark Lord. If you like the video, please give it a thumb up and subscribe if you are not already, as each takes just a second to do and will be very much appreciated. See you next time.